podcast focused on trends shaping the future of manufacturing. I'm Alexandria Bjork, your host, here with A.W. Schultz, two thought leaders with a passion for people and manufacturing. Today and every episode, we are diving deep into the advancements, sustainable practices, and dynamic changes transforming how we produce everything.
And now welcome Alexandria Bjork and A.W. Schultz.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Factory of the Future. This is Alexandria Bjork with A.W. Schultz. Today, we're going to be doing an Industry 4.0 on-the-fly workshop Q&A type deal. We had quite a few people respond, but perhaps there's maybe some conflicts or whatever happened. And here we are. So we've got one guest on the show today. So it may end up being more of an interview and exchange of ideas. It may end up being a conversation that AW and I end up having about Industry 4.0 with some additional folks in the room. And either way, it's going to be a good episode. So thanks for tuning in as always. And at this time, I'll turn it over to AW to bring us into the conversation about Industry 4.0 and kind of steer the conversation. So let it rip.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Yep.
And what we had planned today was just a Q&A. And I've got a couple questions that I have already pre-staged for our conversation, but I know working with Alexandra, she's probably going to have some more, and which I welcome. And if anybody else has some questions, please put them in the chat. But we have been working on, Alexandra and I, for probably, has it been 8 months, maybe a year, on building on a workshop on Industrial 4.0.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
And we've been spending a lot of time on it. We actually had an event, and we've moved it out a little bit. And it's not that because we don't have interest in it. I think that you and I've got some learnings to do about the whole marketing on it. So we're always looking for advice on that part, especially myself. But in the aspects of it, Industrial 4.0, it's an intriguing, it's Industry 4.0 and digital technology kind of go hand in hand. It deals with the Internet of Things. So everything internet. And I'm just going to throw out there just random stuff. I hope I goes into a theme on it because it resonates in my head quite a bit. But it's, it was started in 2011 and it came out of Germany. And it had to do with a presentation on cybersecurity. So that doesn't mean that 4.0 wasn't there beforehand, but we've done episodes before, and I was working on deploying 4.0 before I even knew I was doing 4.0.
Yeah.
Because it's dealing with incorporating technology or up-to-date technologies. So you're talking about the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, well, I'm going to say robotics, but I mean the advancements, there's certain robotics or advancements in robotics, automation, and it comes in it all fills into the manufacturing community, which often spills out into the other workplaces that are surrounding it. Technologies that drive Industry 4.0, big data, robotics, cloud computing. Yep. Probably most of the people that turn into this podcast or have been around when before there was cloud, there was, you save it on your hard drive or you put it in your server, and now everything goes into the cloud, and data is something over, algorithms done. We're running all that fancy analysis that we maximize data. And that's what pushes 4.0. It's about creating efficiencies and output.
Connected technologies, right? So
We
want to connect the technology. So in a manufacturing example, you would want your ERP connected with your WMS, your warehouse management software, connected with your POS for, this, so you're managing your inventory levels, You want that connected with your TMS to manage the shipments and the quantities of shipments going out, whether it's on an LTL or truckload basis. You want, you're really creating a closed loop of technology systems that run your business. Think of industrial 4.0 as connected technology to run your business, every aspect of it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly correct. It's out there, and it's very I don't know what the term, but the technology is right in the grips of it. It's all that stuff that we have out there today. The benefits include, it helps. It's reduced cost because we're doing more outputs on it, improved quality, faster production, enhanced supply chain transparency, and just what Alexandria had said. Now, some of the challenges, and I think we're all seeing that today, and to me is like cybersecurity. I mean, I can't remember my passwords anymore and then I have to do these dual verifications. But with the interconnected there's also the cyber threats, and that's been playing a big role into it. Mm-hmm. I think, Alexander, I remember sharing a story where I do in my workshops, I introduce them to failure mode effects analysis. And I ask them that they're in charge of the country. And when you're in charge of the country, what are the biggest threats? Or they're in charge of the company. And when I've done it in the US, I've done it in Africa and Canada, I was surprised that every time cybersecurity always came up. And one time I did it was just locally here, and they're like, how did you know we were under a cyber attack? Like, I didn't.
That's interesting. So I think cyber stuff is much more important. I think companies are behind. When I think about Industry 4.0 and Industry 5.0, I think about digital maturity and like systems, right? So the only way you can really be successful at having connected technologies is if you have a standard way of doing things. Like, for example, right now I'm dealing with a massive headache at my day job. So I'm responsible for something like 7,000, 8,000 units, right? Assets, trailers. And in one system, the asset ID is this. In another system, the asset ID is that. In another system, the asset ID is this. So we have all these different asset IDs that are pertaining to the same unit. So I'm going through this systematic renumbering process, at least from a technology standpoint, so that way that even though we don't have connected technologies because we're not so digitally mature, it'll at least be easier to cross-reference between 4 different systems that are expected to be kept up to date, right? Because we identified last week that I was missing 50% of the GPS tracking data in our maintenance software, and our maintenance software is used to update and maintain those particular units, right? So these are some real world, real life applications of what AW is talking about with using connected technologies, using Industry 4.0 to advance your business. But sometimes you have to do the boring foundational work and leveling the ground in order to, move forward, right? So you go slow to go fast, in other words, right? Because once you get some of these foundational things like your processes set up, you can then connect your technologies because you have a standard way of naming your units across 4 platforms. And then it's easier to connect those different things. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about Industry 4.0, but also is the people part, right? Because we can't talk about Industry 4.0 without talking about Industry 5.0. So it's great to be interested in technology and advancing technology. However, if we are not upskilling our people, especially here in the US, we're going to be in a worse place workforce wise than we can probably really imagine. And I'll let AW talk a little bit more about kind of what he's seeing in terms of upskilling people, because that's what he spends a lot of his time doing. So where I'm on the consulting side and some doing more problem solving on a day-to-day operations level, or just from simply, consulting side, he's training the people that and upskilling them within organizations. That's what he spends a bunch of his time on. He's obviously consulted a lot in the past, but yeah, like what do you think about that?
Can I ask another question real quick?
Yeah.
You mentioned digital maturity for your organization, but you've also talked to me about these other projects that you've worked on, which gave me the impression that I think you're more mature than maybe you give yourself credit for. Where do you see the organization next steps? Or maybe that's not a question we should be talking about in the air, but.
Well, I think that's a good differentiation, right? So I would say my organization, and this is maybe could be received as some type of way, but I don't really care. I think what falls under my purview is digitally mature because I get it and I'm doing the things that need to be done. I think as a whole, the organization I work for is not digitally mature because they're not even prioritizing focus or interested in connecting technologies. They're actually pushing away from that. That's culturally the norm. It just, my particular preference and style is to connect technology and make it better for the worker. So like I'm very industry 4.0, but the organization is not necessarily, which I think is fine. I mean, I think I'm always trying to go at some of our conversations, not only from the organizational standpoint, but what the worker can do. So hopefully that serves as a little bit of inspiration that even if you're working at a company that's not really digitally mature or interested in connected technologies, that doesn't mean you can't bring parts of that to your role and to your team in how you serve and support those that your work affects. So that's the way I like to think about it. Like, okay, maybe I'm not going to change the entire organization's culture and attitude about digital transformation and, integrated technologies, but I see a value in doing it, at least in my little silo, and I'm going to do it as much as they let me.
Yeah. Just to remind those on the call, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We're just kind of going back and forth, Industrial 4.0. Your question was about, was it digital maturity? Was that what you were asking about?
I was more like asking about how can maybe some people, so from my worker standpoint, think about how you can integrate the technologies you use and make a plan for that, right? And try to pitch it to your organization. But from a company standpoint, part of digital maturity is making sure we're upskilling our people, right? And that's a big part of what you do at your workshops, at your training sessions, and everything that you're doing as a professional outside of your academic career, outside of the podcast and all the other pursuits you have. So how do you go about upskilling people for these organizations that you're partnered with? And what can organizations do to bring their workforce up with the digital transformation maybe they're interested in making? Or even from a one person in one department standpoint, how do you prepare the workers that this change affects?
I'll answer it this way. I guess it's like any project, it begins with your stakeholders and the communication part about it and why you're doing it. So often or not that I've fallen into the trap of failing to communicate why we're making these changes and being asked the question later on. And to me, it's about understanding this is an evolution and we're trying to drive change onto it and we're trying to get better at what we do. I mean, to be competitive, you have to be continuously improving. And for these organizations, I mean, I don't have that magical key that says this solves everything, but I do have what is understanding is building on our roadmap on, you use the word digital maturity, of understanding where they're at. And so often or not, we've talked about before, you go in these organizations and they bring in this great technology that runs absolutely fantastic. They train up the folks only to find themselves leaving in a couple years and they're back down to the same place they were before, except they've got workforce that don't know how to use it.
So what I could take away from that again is just maybe instead of making these broad brushstroke changes, these really, when you say transformation, I think big moves, right? So maybe what some of the people listening might take away from this is, rather than trying to change everything, just focus on making minor improvements, 1% improvements, start to end in the process, and then just kind of rinse and repeat, and just, to your point, continuous improvement, go back over that, right? Like make a little improvement throughout each part of the process, then come back and reevaluate. And just do that in a cycle. And that's much more, those bite-sized changes are much more acceptable and much more, I would say, easy for people to get on board with.
Yeah. I did, I'm just telling you this first time. I did one of my executive roundtables last week, and
Yep.
I had an individual on there. He's in charge of they make food processing equipment, but they're benefited by making sure they upscale their customers' workforce. And he was talking about, and I was asking the question about, like, how much are you investing? Like, and he was, well, at least 3 to 4%. I don't know what that meant, but he was on the same board as, like, you can buy the technology, but you got to train your workforce on it.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what his job was. He goes to all these sites and he helps them upscale it. And we had a fun conversation about, he can walk into an organization and just immediately read it right off the bat. Like, he doesn't even have to ask. And
Yeah.
I kind of see that too. And I think you probably see it. You can walk into a workplace and it's like, digitally mature. No, actually, maturity wise in manufacturing, they need some upskilling, and you can just tell that by walking through the front doors.
It's funny you were talking about that. I was talking to a client yesterday about just when you step foot on a manufacturing facility, right? And you get a certain sense for the business that you can't get through the salesperson, through the corporate visit. You actually get a feel for what this organization stands for, like the quality of work you're going to get. And it was funny, this guy's like a VP of a pretty large national company. And he was like, absolutely. I was like, there's just a certain energy that you get when you walk on a manufacturing floor that gives you the sense of, is this a company I want to do business with? So you can get a real feel for that. But hey, AW, before we close out, is there any like closing thoughts or 3 things people can do to prepare for move forward with Industry 4.0 at their own organizations or in their own roles before we wrap it up?
Yeah, it's understanding that while there's technology and there's when you're building your plans, there's also that training aspect of it, and how are you going to maintain it? Workforces today, 3 to 4 years, that's about all you get out of a single individual. That's just a national U.S. average. So be thinking about the future of it. Always be planning for the future, and having a training plan that correlates with it. It's a little bit beyond probably what the HR might have as far as aspects of it. But to be successful, it's having an onboarding process that one incorporates the people part of it, and having that into the aspects of driving change.
I would add to that a lot of companies make the mistake of thinking you train people once and they get it. Usually if I'm doing any of my integrated technologies, the training is about a year of effort. Yeah. It's like a year of dedicated training to these weekly, bi-weekly, individual communication. So it's a real true campaign and commitment that I think people really forget about. The other thing I'll add to this with Industry 4.0 and how to prepare for it at your company is that it's not only about the implementation. It's not, only about making sure that you have quality training and training that's ongoing, so that way you can continually work this into the business process over the course of a year or so. But it just as much is about maintaining the system, right? I think a lot of leaders, a lot of people forget that it's not just simply implementing a system, it's the ongoing maintenance. It's the business process that now you have to design for keeping the unit numbers up to date in all these new systems now. It's the business process around how do we add and subtract employees to all these things, and how do we modify user permissions? What user permissions do we want? We started with this idea. Do we change it now? So, I think thinking about the implementation and communication is important, but also the back end process of training and management and ongoing improvements is probably just about more important than the implementation, because you can always correct whatever mistakes you make in implementation, and usually it's not going to go correctly anyway. But if you don't have any resources to ongoingly manage it, you're not going to be good. Not going to be successful.
I'm building a training plan for managers and supervisors, and that's one of the key aspects of it. They should be spending minimum 20-25% of their time in the re-education part of it. What does that include? I'm not sure, but just building up the current workforce, checking on the current workforce.
Yeah.
And that's part of active supervision.
Yep. And on that note, we're clocking out.
We're clocking out finished goods.
Yep.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for joining.
This is Factory of the Future, and we are out of here like finished goods. Stay tuned for our next episode of Factory of the Future, where we're exploring groundbreaking techniques and behaviors that are reshaping industrial landscapes. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review and help others discover the cutting-edge insights transforming manufacturing as we know it.